Hey, hey, hey! How you doing, universe? It's the Two Maesters here. Hope you've been having a lovely Blue Monday this week, because I sure didn't, because it's Blue Monday, the most miserable day of the year. Thanks, universe. Today, we're going to talk about Dune. As usual, it's myself and Josh. Oh, wait. There's two Joshes in the studio. Hi, Josh number 2. How are you doing?
How long have you had to come up with
Last night.
Okay.
And of course, we have our standard Joshua here. Joshua number 1. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. And just quickly, when I was online, watching videos, people will either say Dune or June, and I'm like, which is the correct way?
Oh God, I don't know.
Dune.
I just say
It's
Dune.
a sand dune.
I say Dune. Yeah, it's like people who say issues or issues, and you're like, it's a bit triggering, isn't it? Yeah, I'm glad we cleared that up. Yeah. I think we should get the name of the show right. Yeah, that's all, folks.
That's it.
Thanks for coming.
Oh, I had an hour to
So, Dune is a very big universe. It's been going since the 1960s, with the first book being written by Frank Herbert being published and released in 1965. There's quite a few books in the series. I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe about 6 roughly, but then they progressively get worse as time goes on, in my opinion, but we'll see about that. So to start things off, let's all say what sort of media or interpretations of Dune have we seen. I myself have read the books up to book number 4, which I finished, and I've seen the 1984 David Lynch movie and the recent Dune Part 1 that came out in 2021?
Yeah.
Or was it 2021? What about yourself, Josh, number 1?
For me, it was just watching on UK TV, the TV adaptation, and not understanding a thing.
the mini series.
Yeah, they'd show it I remember just half term or Easter or Christmas. They'd show. I think it was on either History yesterday or on Challenge during the day, and I was like, this looks interesting. It's got the guy from Narnia, so James McAvoy in it.
Yeah, it does.
But I don't understand the story whatsoever. Why is there a huge worm? What is spice? So then I did take a break from it, and then it was watching the 2021 film, the Warner Brothers film, actually yesterday as well. So everything's fresh with me, and it was I was like, okay, then I understand. But then I was like, wait, is that character James McAvoy's character, or is it that he's a different character in the series? So then it just broke up so many different questions watching it.
Funny enough, I haven't seen a TV series, but I think James McAvoy plays. Well, there's so many. Well, by the way, feel free with spoilers because we just can't hold back in this show. Yeah. But I think James McAvoy is Paul Atreides' son.
Oh, okay.
Leto
Atreides. Yeah. What adaptations have you seen?
So.
Oh, big man over it.
So I've seen the one true film, the David Lynch version.
Oh, whatever.
I've obviously seen the new version, which impressive, but not quite David Lynch. I've seen the miniseries, and I have read the 6 original Dune books written by Frank Herbert.
Oh, nice. Yeah, because of course his sons take over, I think, from Hunters of Dune in 2006 and Sandworms of Dune in 2007. Have you read those?
No. I'm at a bit of a crossroads about whether to read them. So the son actually wrote some prequel books before he wrote the sequel, being the first sequel.
No, really?
to
Okay.
Frank's Dune. He calls it the Dune, not Dune cycle or something along those lines. It's doesn't matter. Anyway, so he wrote a series of prequel books covering the Butlerian Jihad. So I don't know if that sort of popped up may not have come up in the...
I think they deliberately avoided references in the new Dune, which we can talk about in a bit. But yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute. But go on, you're saying.
Okay, so that's 10,000 years prior to Dune.
Okay.
And it sort of sets the scene as to why everything is just screwed up as it is, and why they've got this very anti-AI, anti-computer, everything must be done by humans attitude in the Dune universe.
Yeah.
And then they did some prequel stories around the famous houses. So House Corrin, which is obviously the Emperor Padashan, whatever his name is.
I believe it's South Korea, actually.
I think Emma Corrin. That's what. I think you're absolutely right. I'll go.
That's fine.
And then, so the story then goes that they've done those, and everyone's like, okay, add some interesting background. Then they find in a locked safe in Frank Herbert's house.
Oh wow!
Long after he's dead, 30 pages of notes for the sequels after Chapter
Oh my
Dune.
god!
There is some, and I say this with a caveat that this might be complete and utter nonsense. There is some debate as to whether these 30 pages of notes actually exist and whether they've just gone. It's a story about people traveling in space, consuming drugs from a giant space worm. So
yeah,
we'll do what we like.
That's Dune summed up. That's the story of Dune. Yeah, pretty much. No, it's quite fascinating because Dune really, in my opinion, and a lot of other people's opinion, inspired Star Wars, inspired Warhammer. We think about the timeline here. Like, the first Dune book came out in 1965, which is really early for science fiction. I mean, obviously you had people like H.G. Wells, War of the Worlds and stuff before that, but it's really early. And to give a bit of background, let's talk a bit about Frank Herbert first. So he was born in 1920 in Washington State, USA. He died in 1986. That's it. No, just kidding. He was from an impoverished background. He served in World War II in the Navy, but was discharged after an accidental injury. He's a very famous science fiction author, which we will show you why. It's easy to say that, but why is he a famous author? He attended university, but never graduated, actually. He felt the curriculum didn't let him do what he wanted to do, so he just kind of went a bit rogue and just never really finished. He is a bit of a proto-environmentalist. For his time, especially Dune, there's a lot of themes about the environment and environmentalism that I think is somewhat ahead of its time, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. He listed as his influences, surprise, surprise, H.G. Wells, Robert A. Heinlein, Paul Anderson, and Jack Vance. I only know H.G. Wells. Do any of those other names mean anything to you guys?
No.
Exactly. This is how far back we're going with this science fiction. Like, there was the one you mentioned, was it John Carter? When was that written? Is that like...
Yeah,
that's an old one.
Yeah, that is an old. That is.
Yeah, I wonder if that predated Dune, actually.
And possibly, maybe the author is one of the people you mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah, watch how it is.
Possibly.
Oops. So in the Dune series, there's quite a few books. The first book, Dune, as we already said, was released in 1965. Dune Messiah, which was originally serialized in a magazine, came out in 1969 and is one of the shortest novels I've ever read, even compared to like a children's novel like Captain Underpants. Like, it is so thin. If I can find it, I'll lend it to you, Josh. Then there's Children of Dune in 1976, God Emperor of Dune in 1981, Heretics of Dune in 1984, Chapped House Dune in 1985, but then unfortunately Frank Herbert's death in 1986. And then Hunters of Dune in 2006 and Sandworms of Dune in 2007 were published by his sons. So, what is Dune? Because, frankly, me and Josh clearly are my brother Josh number 2. Oh, in case the audience didn't know, that's my brother there. Yeah, the resemblance is uncanny.
We're only 10 minutes in, it's okay.
Older brother. Well, funny enough, our overlord Jeff, who is Josh's brother, is actually in the room next to us, so maybe I should knock. So, what is Dune? What is a brief overview of the universe? Well, I think Josh number 2 summed up pretty well by saying spacefarers who are munching drugs that is excreted out of a worm's anus. That sums up fairly well, but let's go into a bit more detail. So Dune is set in the year 10,190, but the dating isn't AD, it's AG, which means after Guild. Again, so much information. and the timelines are so far away from where we are right now. For example, so Dune is in 10190. The next book's kind of nearby. Children of Dune's kind of nearby. God, Emperor of Dune is 3,500 years after the first book. Wow. So timelines are insane.
There's a big jump after God Emperor as well.
Yeah. Oh, is there?
Another big jump as well.
How long? I thought you were an expert.
You're meant to have the answers. I'm meant to sit here and look pretty.
God, I wish I had my
it's again another like multi-thousand year jump.
Yeah, it's insane. It's insane. Now, where do we start? Where's a good place to start with, like, sort of explaining how mankind is living in the year 10,000?
Well, so I guess, as we sort of spoke earlier, the whole sort of basis for the film is two things. First of all, they hate computers, as we described, because basically you had the Butlerian Jihad, which was basically their robots, their androids that they created to help them, which were also living semi-autonomously as well. I haven't read the books, but it's either they rose up or that essentially they started enslaving humanity, and humanity then rose up and there was a big war and the robots were all sent on their merry way.
Yeah, so, and you see that happen in a lot of science fiction universes. Mass Effect, for example.
Mass Effect, and even like Star Trek as well, watching Picard as well.
I've just started watching that.
And it's like a prominent thing. Like, you've got The Matrix, you've got Terminator, you've got so many different things.
Battlestar Galactica.
Oh, God.
Like, you could even point to like Doctor Who with like the Cybermen as well. Like, there's a constant fear like throughout sci-fi, like, if we make sentient robots, they are going to basically even Marvel with what's his name again, Ultron, and even like you've got Brainiac in DC. It's like, if we make these intelligent robots or AIs or even like VIs, virtual intelligence, they will rise up and then decide to say that we don't need you anymore, so therefore move over, we're now the dominant species.
Exactly. And I'd love to bet money on this, and then somehow that bet could last maybe 10,000 years when this sort of uprising by AI happens. We haven't even said Skynet from Terminator. But yeah, as you were saying, mankind doesn't trust robots or computers. That's probably a good place to start.
So that's the first thing you have to understand. So that's why the technology is very manual, and also why all of their big thinking is done by humans. So they have the
human computers,
the mentats, which are the human computers, right? Yeah. So, and these are just trained. They're not robots or anything. These are people that have had their minds trained to think about logic. Okay, and then you've also got, so you had the Butlerian Jihad, and then you had, as a result of that, you had the setting up of these mind schools. So you had the mentats, the Bene Gesserit, which was primarily for women, and then you also had the Navigator School, Space Guild. Yeah. Okay. Now the Space Guild is really important in Dune because to achieve faster than light travel, they have the engines. But of course, this is where the spice thing comes in, because you can travel faster than light, but those big rocks, planets, whatever, don't move out of the way.
Yeah.
So the whole concept of Dune and spice is the spice, apart from other medicinal purposes like extending your life like 3 or 4 times, it allows the navigators, the Space Guild, to essentially see into the future in a limited extent, so that they can guide ships away from these big space obstacles, right?
Exactly. And as you saw in the movie as well, as you say, it extends life, it allows these navigators, but also basically gives people psychic powers to an extent. So the Bene Gesserit, as you see in the movie, the voice, did you see that scene with the box and Paul and putting his hand in? He was under that Bene Gesserit Reverend Mother's control. She was like, come here, and he somehow just goes over. He's like, whoa, how did I do that? And then Paul does it as well. He's been taught it. So essentially, spice is a like drug that enhances the mind, allows man to travel space, and also allows man to become its own computers, because they don't trust AI or technology after the Butlerian Jihad.
Just one quick thing there.
Go on.
It links to the fact that you said like Star Wars got its like ideas from it. The fact that drug in Star Wars is called spice.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, in Kenobi like, that comes up. Yeah,
and you even see it like in like the 9th film when you find out that Poe was a spice dealer.
Really?
Yeah, you find that in the last film, and like even to your point about like using spice to actually pathfind. I was recently reading one of like the Star Wars books, and it's about like Grand Admiral Thrawn, so a Chiss blue species, and the Chiss, they have the Force, but it's mostly only in young girls, and they use the Force in a special way as pathfinders. So they can see like 5 minutes, 10 minutes into the future at a young age, and then they're able then to guide them and say that, there's a rock there, move this way, move that way. And I think it was like even...
Wow, I wonder where they got these ideas from.
What I'm saying. This is not the story you're looking for. But the whole concept of the voice, the Bene Gesserit voice, being able to control people using the voice, a Jedi mind trick. So it all weaves together with some of the big franchises that you've got today.
Exactly. You see so many links, and like when we're going to do a Warhammer episode at some point, but I think we've already got someone for that. You're not needed. No. We'll get you back on for something else. Well, tough crap. You got
I thought if I come on, I do Dune, I do a good job, I prove myself, you'll have me back for
Wait,
Warhammer.
is he my replacement? Are you trying to replace me, Josh number one?
Or maybe are you two trying to replace me? You've already got a Josh now, so technically you could say, and here's Josh.
And you said he'd be gone in 10
just replace me, call it the two Joshes instead of Two Maesters. That'll work.
It works.
It does.
So yeah, you see that spice is probably the most valuable commodity in the known universe in Dune, and it only comes from one planet. What planet do you reckon that is?
The ones with all the worms on it.
Yeah, exactly. Arrakis.
And then the question is like, do they explain at all in the series, like, why the worms can create spice? Is it something special about the worms?
I can't remember. Can you remember?
Yeah, so the spice is like... it's part of the worm's life cycle. So you've got this thing called sand trout, right, which is like mini worms, right? But what they do is they like gather around water to protect the worms, because water is poison to the sandworms of Dune.
Okay.
And it's part of the reason why Dune is the way it is because the worms have essentially eradicated moisture from the planet. And in the later books, when you get to Chapter House Dune, it's all about creating a new Dune on the planet Chapter House. And it goes into that sort of life cycle, eradicating water. So the spice itself is part of that life cycle from an adult Dune. And forgive me, I don't remember the full detail, but essentially, no worms, no spice. No spice, no long life, no travel between, no interstellar travel. The universe grinds to a halt. And that's why the Space Guild is so powerful in Dune, is because they control the travel between planets, and not everyone can become a navigator because it morphs you into a monster, essentially, where you have to live inside a tank filled with orange gas made from the spice. It's grim.
It is very grim. Grim Dark.
It is the beginning of Grim Dark, another tie to a big franchise. Long after it.
Wow, where did Warhammer 40k get all their ideas from? Wow, same as Star Wars. Yeah, and that's it. The spice warps people in a way, and these guild navigators, although they're called navigators, it sounds like they're very normal, but they are very mutated fish people living in an orange tank, which you don't actually see in the Dune Part 1 movie in 2021. You will see in it's coming out this year actually, but you will see in Part 2. It's pretty crazy and nasty and just dark. And that's a big overarching theme in Dune, just sort of the grim darkness of it. I feel like whenever me and Josh number one always talk about shows, like we like it because it's dark, but I feel like everything's dark. Is that just the spirit of the times today?
Yeah, I think maybe because one of the things I kept on thinking about was like, why do some sci-fi or fantasy shows like hit mainstream first time and everyone loves them? And then why do some take longer to mature? And you kind of see that with like a Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
That because of the dark side of it, it's hard to like latch onto. especially during the 90s or the early 2000s, people would be so afraid to put it out on TV. But then I think because television is now changed, you can actually have shows which are that dark. And even I think because we haven't had shows that are that dark, you see like a plethora of them. Like you've got The Witcher, you've got
the Dark Knight series.
You've got the Dark Knight series, was a dark adaptation of DC. You've got like Marvel fans. Do you remember the Netflix Marvel shows? All of them were pretty dark as well.
Yeah, Daredevil, Jessica Jones.
And I feel like it's like I think people are just tired of like fantasy not being realistic to a degree.
Yeah.
I think that people want some form of like realism in it. And I think that's what, when we was talking about like last week on the Witcher, that's why it does so well, is that it brings realism to it. And I think that's what I kind of saw from like Dune, is like the politics in it, and as you mentioned, the dark side of it as well. That is a part of humanity that we are. And I think that's what the author was trying to portray in the books, is that as humans, we have an innate, it's like kind of like innate feeling to like control things. Like if we're not in control, then something's wrong. And then also that to use like a dark, that we always pivot to the dark side, especially those in power.
You're speaking such, you sound like Carl Jung right now. That's it. That is, do you know, like, I feel like you're just giving the synopsis of Dune, because that is a lot about what Dune is about. The mankind has this will to control, but also absolute power corrupts absolutely. Yeah. And that's very much what goes on in this.
Well, they're good guys. There are no good guys in Dune. Wow. It's grey and greyer. Honestly.
The sandworms are good guys. Well, I guess they're not really guys. They're just worms.
Also, are they sentient at all?
That gets explored in...
Okay.
That gets explored a little bit in God Emperor.
Yeah, a little bit.
To a certain extent.
Yeah, they do.
And then again in a limited way. Because, of course, it's not... That's the backdrop, right? And it's a really cool backdrop, but it's about people. The Dune series is about people, control...
Yeah, power, politics, religion. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm also speaking about power. You know, how is mankind organized in this universe in the year 10,000 ish? It's a feudalistic intergalactic empire of a land strat, which is basically a bunch of lords and ladies. Just think of like Game of Thrones, basically. That you have lords, ladies ruling over their land, i.e. parts of the galaxy, and there is instead of an overall king, there is a emperor known as a Padishah emperor, which is ruled by a faction called House Carino. Now, what's really important is, you know, spice. And as Baron Harkonnen says in the 1984 David Lynch, he who controls spice controls the universe, you know. So essentially, I don't know why the Emperor doesn't directly control Arrakis, but he chooses which lord from the land strat will harvest the spice from Arrakis. And as you see in the Dune movie, it's the Harkonnen family that originally have that control, but they're brutal, they're horrible, they're one of the worst brutalist regimes in the known universe. But then they hand it over to the Atreides very mysteriously. Do you remember why they were handing over to the Atreides in the movie?
No.
I'm really putting you on the hot seat here, aren't I? So essentially House Carino wants to hold on to its power as the Emperor, and they see House Atreides as in ascendancy. They have one of the most powerful armies in the known human universe or galaxy, whatever, and they grow jealous. So they plot with House Harkonnen, who have this ancient family feud against House Atreides, to basically bring them down. And they do that by, let's put House Atreides in charge of Arrakis, i.e. in charge of spice production, and then let's fake a red flag operation. Let's destroy them with the Harkonnens, with the Emperor's troops, the Sardaukar, fighting with them. What are the Sardaukar like, Josh?
Depends which film.
Yeah, the 1984 David Lynch one. They look terrible.
I completely disagree. Okay, I get it. They're a little bit comic. It's a little bit 80s, and you know they basically just used bodysuits, body bags.
Yeah, they're literally look like radiation suits with a green glow coming from the inside.
But these guys are meant to basically not be human anymore. Like they're not like the navigators.
Okay. So
you remember in the movie the guys in the white suits?
So kind of like Halo Master Chief type level.
No,
not superhuman.
Not quite.
Yeah.
Not in a technology sense. So these guys have like radio transmitters buried under their toenails, right? They can fight with everything. They are like trained. So they grow up on a prison world.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, like when you had them like upside down in that thing.
Yeah, that weird blood ritual.
Yes, yeah.
That scene's so cool. That is a really cool scene with that way. Like the weird like throat singing going on as well.
Sorry, what was that? I didn't quite. What was that?
Sorry, I'm working on my voice.
Working on your Suddercart retro.
I'll be on Britain's Got Talent soon, don't worry. But yeah, essentially, Seleucus Secundus, that's the prison planet where the Sardaukar, like, basically, it's like a fight for survival. It's a brutal planet. They're all convicts that basically whoever survives make it into the Emperor's military unit ranks called the Sardaukar, and they are tough as hell, like fearsome, very fearsome, and you see that in the Dune movie that they just beat everyone up pretty easily. Very cool. And I think Dune, there's just so many cool factions and groups and structures. Is there a particular one that you find very cool?
I mean, the Fremen themselves are really, really cool. And I just think the way Frank Herbert sort of built up their culture, I mean, there is an entire community and history there that he's created in the early books. You've got the Space Nuns, the Bene Gesserit.
Yeah, who are pretty badass.
Yeah, so they come across as the baddies and in the first couple of books. But don't forget, there are no good guys, right? Not even poor Paul Atreides, poor orphans. Well, not quite orphan because his mother's alive, but you know what I mean. Dad's dead, okay? Even poor Paul Atreides is a bad guy. Okay, he is. Right?
Well, yeah, eventually you see in the books, because one thing we haven't mentioned is the Bene Gesserit. They have this like, when people say I have a long-term plan, I have a 5-year plan, like I'm going to get married in 5 years, I'm going to own a house. The Bene Gesserit have like thousands of year plans. Like they want to set up basically a male breeding program, which they will run, this female-controlled organization that basically will one day give birth to the one who will lead mankind's destiny through a religious further an organization, and it's called the Kwisatz Haderach. So in Dune the movie, Jessica, Paul's mum, basically she is a member of the Bene Gesserit, but she, against the Bene Gesserit's wishes, trained the Kwisatz Haderach too early. It should have happened 2 generations later with someone else, but she started training Paul Atreides in the ways of the Bene Gesserit. And essentially, he is the one. He is this godlike figure that will rule all of humanity.
Yeah, and like
big deal.
Like you can go into this further, Josh, but like looking like online, like for his powers, like being able to see everything that's happened in the past, and then being able to see possible futures. And you kind of saw it in the film when like he was seeing the guy from the Fremen that trained him, and then used those moves to then kill him. And I was like, damn, those are actually pretty decent powers to have. Just like imagine like, should I go to university or should I not go to university? This is the path. Get trained, and then use that time to then get a job. And I was just thinking, like, even to your point that I think it's called like the Golden Path. I was just reading up about it. That's their whole point of it, is to be able to have like a golden path for humanity to basically then just follow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the Golden Path is actually Paul's. Paul is the first person, the first Kwisatz Haderach. Because his son was a Kwisatz Haderach as well. And the whole concept of that is...
Spoilers. Yeah, we don't care on the show.
The whole point of the Bene Gesserit refer to the Kwisatz Haderach as the person that can be many places at once. And what they mean by that is that they can... Because the Bene Gesserit essentially can look back into their memories, their genetic memories of all the women that they have been throughout history. all the way back to the time of Genghis Khan, for example.
Wow.
And they use that to help subtly guide humanity. But what they can't do, they have very limited prescience, so the idea of looking forward.
Future, yeah.
But the whole idea of the Kwisatz Haderach is that he can do both. And they fear that because they can see what's going to happen and guide based on that. So the Golden Path is essentially Paul looking so far in the future that he sees humanity dying. And he doesn't just see it once, he sees it across multiple timelines. So the Golden Path, so he describes prescience, or looking to the future, as basically looking at a blurry set of paths in a darkened cave. He can't really see where to go, what effect it does. You just get this sort of feeling, and he sees multiple futures where humanity is wiped out.
Okay, and then that's the path he then chooses not to take.
No, the Golden Path is the path to humanity's survival, the one that they found.
Okay.
But he, in the second book, Dune Messiah, spoilers, audience, and also, sorry, Josh, you spoiled Marvel for me. But yeah, Paul is a Kwisatz Haderach. But in the second book, he turns against it. He says, no, I don't want to. I see people burning people in my name. I see massacres and mass genocide in my name. This is not how I want humankind to go. This is so wrong. And you see that in the movie as well. Some of the visions he has, you actually see piles of bodies being burned.
Like him on the ship, and then like him standing there.
Yeah, with Chani. See, this is because Dune is the first Dune book is just one book, but for the movie they split it into two, which is really good because they can flesh out more detail. But also, that girl Chani, he has visions of like him getting with her and stuff, and some of them come true, some of his visions come true, some don't. Like he also had a vision that guy at the end, I can't remember his name, kills him, but that didn't come true. He has these precedents. The spice gives him these visions, and sometimes it's right, sometimes it's wrong. It depends which path he goes down. And ultimately, I think a big theme of this book is critique of government, theocracy, and religious fanaticism. You'll see it more probably in part 2, but definitely as the books go on, and if they decide to bring out more movies, basically organized religion and power. It shows that no matter what, it corrupts all. There'll be people, you might be in power and have an ethical compass and a moral word, but there'll be fanatics out there that truly believe in you and will take your word to the point that it leads to death. And it's happened so many times in history. Yeah,
like I think to your point that Josh, you said, like Genghis Khan, like how many of the Mongols in his name literally did so many barbaric things. And you always see it in history, like you have a brilliant emperor, like for example, you've got Emperor Titus of Rome, who was able to defeat the 4 emperors, become an emperor. Or was that his father? And his father defeated the 4 emperors, then became an emperor, passed it to Titus. He was a good emperor, but then you think after another 3 or 4 decades, there's a terrible emperor who undoes everything that was done by the good emperor. And you see it with kings, with pharaohs, that no matter how, it takes just one bad person to mess up the whole cart and everything just goes wrong.
Exactly.
And I think, going to your point, I think Frank Herbert's warning is more fundamental than simply organized religion or those in power. It's more about charismatic leadership. Beware the charismatic leader. So Paul,
Donald Trump.
I mean, I guess he had charisma to certain people, but to me, I could see straight to a lot of us. But for certain people, he had a lot of charisma, I guess. Yeah,
even to the author's point, like Stalin, Hitler.
Yeah, Hitler had a lot of charisma for certain people. Yeah,
if you think about it, the fact that throughout history, if you think about it, majority of the leaders who have done unspeakable things on this planet have been charismatic, and because of their charisma, they've got others to buy in.
Yeah,
and and to his warning point, it's it continues to happen.
Yeah, exactly. So, for example, Hitler, it's historically, I remember we studied this, it's actually very difficult to find any physical evidence that he set up concentration camps, that he signed execution notices, apart from in the early days before World War II. It was the people in his government who enacted like steadily increased anti-Semitic legislation and in the direction towards genocide, because they wanted to please their leader, their charismatic leader.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Hitler was definitely an evil individual, but he inspired people around him to do evil stuff, whether that was deliberate or not. But I mean, it seemed pretty deliberate to me, but there's very little historical evidence to find for that. But my viewers, please correct me if I'm wrong. You know, we've said stuff accidentally wrong on this show before.
But going back to Dune, that's exactly what happens with the Fremen. Okay, they're not quite space Nazis, but what happens is Paul triggers this galactic jihad. Billions are killed in his name, and he reflects on the fact that I can't stop this. Not only can I not stop it, but I'm looking to that golden path of trying to save humanity means I don't see any other way of doing it.
Damn.
It's seriously grim. And what's worse is he then bottles it. He bottles it.
Yeah, he screws it all up. Thanks, Paul. Gee, thanks, Paul.
He doesn't screw it up. He bottles it because he sees what he has to become more than Mr. Sees what he has to become physically. And he bottles it, and he leaves that to his son. His son is the next Kwisatz Haderach, and arguably the proper Kwisatz Haderach. The whole thing, right?
The God Emperor.
Leto II, his son, has visions, has prescience. He's Kwisatz Haderach, and he looks what has to be done to achieve the golden path. And you think Paul killing billions as a result of his, artificially created religious jihad. You think that's bad. You wait and read what happens in God Emperor about how Leto II basically has to force humanity, has to reorganize humanity on a like a communal level to try and save it. And
he becomes a dictator essentially, doesn't he?
They call him the tyrant.
Yeah, tyrant. Yeah,
and he says, "You will know me as the tyrant, but I am doing this." And one of the great things about about Heretics of Dune is they uncover a hidden stash of spice in Sietch Tabr, which is where Paul runs to in the Dune film
at the end of the movie
with the Fremen. And Leto has left a message thousands of years in the past for the Bene Gesserit to discover, saying, I know God. I treated you like crap, okay? I know I squashed you, and I squashed everyone for thousands of years, but there is a reason for it. Will you side with me? Think about noble purpose, and that's what the whole thing is about. Is the
golden path.
The golden path is grim, but it's absolutely necessary, and I'm trying to do the right thing.
Yeah. And like sometimes you even see it in history. Like for example, when invaders invade, and then you've got the people are outnumbered. The king basically says, I think the Russians did it when the Nazis invaded Russia. And I think when the Mongols invaded Europe, they basically did the same thing, the scorched earth tactics.
Yeah.
I think the amount of people who had to be sacrificed and died. And I think
for the greater good.
The best example I think is Vlad the Impaler, the person that was used for Vlad Dracula. I think this is correct, but I'm 100% sure that the Mongols were coming to Europe. They had gone to they've gone to parts of Romania, they've gone to parts of Poland, almost touched Austria. And then I think they were going to Romania. He basically took a portion of his population, impaled them on spikes, and had them all outside his castle.
His own population.
And then the Mongols were so scared that they'd left his lands alone. And then the question that historians have always been asking themselves is that, was his actions justified? For me, it's no. You couldn't have found another way. But then the historians are maybe there wasn't a way. Maybe that was the only way to prevent a Mongol invasion and possibly the wiping out of all the people within that region.
What a noble guy, Vlad the Impaler. So noble he didn't volunteer himself or his own family to be impaled.
Well, I mean, Stalin said it, didn't he? He said, one death is a tragedy, then a million deaths is a statistic.
Oh, wow. I feel like I should be very worried if you ever get any power, Josh. But that is interesting, isn't it? The sacrifices a charismatic leader will use to basically justify their rule.
Well, it's Paul's revenge story. So, the Emperor and Baron Harkonnen kill his father, take over Arrakis, effectively wipe out House Atreides. And Paul and his mother Jessica essentially take advantage of the myth of the what do they call it, the visitor from the outer world or something like that. So because just to give you context, the Bene Gesserit have this like subdivision called the Missionaria Protectiva. And they go around the galaxy setting up religious savior stories. So in case any of their members of their sisterhood, any Reverend Mothers, get into trouble, they can use that to say, I'm...
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And you must... So everyone then looks after them. So the Fremen on Dune are set up with this as part of that. Not necessarily because they were trying to set Paul up as the Kwisatz Haderach, just as part of the Bene Gesserit's standard operating protocol for, business continuity for their Reverend Mothers, their employees.
Wow.
No, seriously.
It's very corporate.
So they take advantage of that. So the Fremen have got no sort of spiritual connection to Paul himself, but they think he's the savior, and he takes advantage of that. Is he right?
Lisan al-Gaib.
Well, yeah, the caller from the other world, or whatever the translation is. So he takes advantage of that, and whether you think he's right because he's been done a tough one by the Emperor and the old Baron, whether you think that's right, he still creates a war. For his own purposes.
Yeah. I know it is like fascinating, but I'm very conscious that me and Josh could talk lore for ages, and then we could we could kick this Josh out and be like, leave us alone, we'll keep going. So let's go on to the most recent movie adaptation, the 2021 movie by David Villeneuve. Does anyone know how to pronounce his name?
No. That's why I'm laughing.
No. Yeah.
You've done about as good a job as I would.
Yeah.
Is it Villeneuve or something like that?
Yeah.
Apologies, Dennis. Fluent. You did a fantastic job.
Did you just call him Dennis?
What's his name?
David.
Whatever.
Damn it, Dennis. But yeah, movie. I really liked it. I thought it was very good. It was true to the first book. I mean, as much as it could be. One thing I would point out is in the book compared to the movie, with the movie, they avoided any references to the word jihad or crusade, apart from in the trailer for the movie. They did said, Paul speaking said, I saw a crusade. But in the movie, nothing, no mention of that.
You can kind of understand why,
at least so far
the times,
exactly. In modern context, those sort of words, I mean, they haven't gone down well, so I guess movie makers are trying to be quite sensitive there, maybe for the better.
Ironically, the Dune books are full of references to Islam.
Yeah, they are.
In fact,
Frank Herbert based a lot of it.
The main religion in the galaxy is based on a mixture of what they refer to as the Orange Catholic Bible and the Islamiyat.
Yeah, I was reading in history.
A lot of the words they use is from Arabic, so it's apart from the fact it's in a
there's a
well, and the universe is X number of thousands of years in the future, and it resembles nothing like what we have in terms of civilization.
Yeah,
it's any sort of hesitance is one of people misunderstanding the.
Well, yeah, this book was written in the 1960s, way before any of the stuff that has been going on today with extremism and terrorist organizations that have taken those words out of context, etc. You've got to remember that it's a product of its times, I guess, or not a product of its times, but in those times, those words weren't used in a certain way. But again, we've got to understand modern context and the context of those books when they were written. In terms of like some other aspects of the movie I thought were quite interesting were the way that they basically show the world of Arrakis. It's looked at in a very sort of Orientalist kind of way. It's the desert. The ways of the Fremen are seen very strange and mysterious. Is there anything you found particularly interesting about the movie, or maybe about the Fremen?
I would say that it was like, it reminded me of those old 50s and 60s space operas. that you actually felt it was like, because everyone's like
Flash Gordon.
Kind of like it had like the actual proper vibes of a actual space opera, because people are like, oh, Star Wars is a space opera, but you kind of feel like Star Wars isn't as much, because like the soundtrack for the film was amazing, and like the way that I think Hans Zimmer did it. I think it was Hans Zimmer.
Yeah, it was Hans Zimmer.
The way that he did the sounds and like melded, like, you know, when the voices that they say, the chants, linking that with the music as well. You don't really see that in Star Wars, and like, but you do kind of see that in some of like the really old like sci-fi films from the 50s and the 60s, that you do feel like it's a space opera. And I also have to say, like, the people who did like the settings and also the design for like the backdrop of the series, like the planets and like the different worlds, they did really, really well.
Yeah, beautiful.
It was
the
really
outfits as well.
It's a stunning film, really, really is.
Yeah, they definitely put the effort. And I remember hearing that a lot of it, rather than using a lot of CGI for backgrounds, they actually shot on set in the desert. And when there was a sandstorm, they'd actually use like they'd blow sand around rather than just using, in movies, like basically a layer on the screen that just shows snow and stuff, and it just looks very fake. Yeah, can't fault that. The soundtrack, very cool, very, very cool. Like, for example, the Benny Gesserit song goes like, like very chorusy, almost like Star Wars, but I don't think it quite has the same like catchiness as Star Wars. It's more like, this is a movie, take it or leave it, while Star Wars is like, you know, Binary Sunset has such a catchy appeal that anyone could listen to.
And I think even my sister was just telling me about the way that George Lucas developed it. Was like, he looked at so many different religions, folk tales, stories. Definitely looked at Dune and was like, okay, then what are the aspects that all of them have? And then built the Star Wars universe.
Oh, right.
And I think that's why it has this mass appeal.
Yeah.
Because he basically said, I'm not going to go into that much detail, for example, as much as the Dune author did, for example, like Crusades or Jihadists. I'm not going to put it so science fiction like Star Trek that it will lose people. I'm just going to focus on like good versus evil.
Yeah.
And that is the plot. And that good triumphing over evil. And I think that is the thing that he said that he saw in so many different folk tales, in so many different religions, or in lore, in general, that even if it takes a while, good triumphs over evil. And he knows that that's the best way to tell a story if you want to get a universal audience. And that's how he then played out Star Wars. And that's why you kind of feel like you see the universal appeal, but then I think sometimes when people watch stuff like, for example, like Dune, or some people watch like The Witcher or Game of Thrones, it might pull some people off because it's sometimes like too realistic to what they see on television.
Yeah.
Or they see in the real world. But I think that George Lucas did it purposely, that it is something which is, it's basically like a fairy tale story. That's what Star Wars literally is. A fairy tale in space. And I think, if you think about it, which person didn't grow up listening to any type of fairy tale?
But that's true.
And if you think about it, like,
that's a good point.
Disney's made billions off that, like showing fairy tales that children and adults and of all ages will watch, and even like watch it 3 times. Like, I never really understood that. Like, you watch the cartoon version, now you're going to watch the
real life version,
but it's still cartoon version, because it's like the beast is still animated. It's like it's still not like a full film, but it's like and I think that's what he did with the films. But I think, like what I was saying with before, people want some kind of like realism, and that's why you've got like Endor isn't like an actual proper Star Wars series if you think about it. It doesn't feel like something developed by George Lucas.
Yeah, very dark, very grassroots.
Yeah, and I think that's what fans are looking for today, is like some form of like realism within, or something that they can see like, oh, I see this in the real world, I see it in science fiction, and it brings like a new perspective on it as well.
Do you think that's why Darth Vader is the most, even though he's undeniably the bad guy, he killed kids,
younglings. He killed the younglings.
Destroyed a whole planet.
Yeah. but people love him.
Yeah.
People dress their kids up in him. Is it because he's a complex character? So he's the one part of Star Wars that is undeniably complex. He's a fallen hero. Did he fall for the right reasons? Manipulated that sense of a little bit
there's
sense of the
tragedy, a bit
underdog,
of Greek
maybe.
tragedy about it. Yeah.
And maybe
Yeah.
that's why people like the grim dark, is because it is complex. It's not binary in terms of these are the good guys, these are the bad guys. It's like
Everything's
people have,
shades of grey.
Yeah, like even
People
like
have agendas.
Shakespeare. If people go around like, what's your favorite Shakespeare play? It's either Macbeth, Romeo and Juliet, or Hamlet. Like when you've got like the 12th Night, some people like it, but it's like the tragedies that people like the most because you then actually see the characters. Like you could see, and I think that's why people love Darth Vader and like throughout throughout the whole series, and I think also why people love like Darth Maul as well is that later on with Darth Maul, especially like in the Clone Wars series, you actually see the character, and I think when people are like complex and also, as you said, conflicted characters, I think people like them more because you can actually see like who they actually are. While it kind of seemed like with Luke, I think that's why I kind of liked it in like the second film, Empire Strike Back. It kind of felt like Luke's character was actually shown more because he had to go through
the
adversity.
Yeah.
And like that's one of the things I think that as human beings we like seeing in TV series.
When he's conflicted about that.
You have to see an adversity that a character goes through, and it has to be believable for us to then get to buy into it.
That's why I think, bringing this back to Dune, that's why I think you're like, the characters in Dune are really good. Like, for example, Paul, he's really conflicted in Dune Messiah, and to an extent in the movie as well. You can see he has a bad dream when he's in the desert in that tent with his mum, and he like wakes up, he's like, why did you do this to me? You've made me into a weapon, blah blah blah. And like the visions he has of all the massacres and stuff are pretty crazy, and it has that sense of tragedy about it. In terms of the characters you saw in the movie, any particular ones that stand out to you?
I would say the Baron stood out to me.
Oh, really? Okay. What are your thoughts on the Baron?
I think just like the way that the character, the actor portrayed him, and also the weird thing like him like levitating in the air as well. Like,
yeah, that was cool.
But I didn't really get that. Like, was he like levitating, or was that like part of himself that was?
Well, you know the old song of Who Ate All the Pies?
Yeah.
The Baron ate all the pies. That's why he needs his levitation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's just a levitation device because he's portrayed as being very gluttonous.
Yeah,
like that's part of his character. He's a megalomaniac, greedy, capitalist pig. Basically, that's how they present him.
He's all the worst excesses of Western societies, and that's how the Harkonnens are represented. They've destroyed their world. They enslave other human beings.
The way they treat Fremen as well, and Arrakis itself.
Blood sports all the time. Yeah. They take advantage of the environment, so they're
kind of seems like the Roman Empire kind of thing. Like they love. And I think
bread and games.
Yeah.
A little bit in the book. You could see that.
They also have emperors as well. And I think one thing that they do say about the Roman Empire is like how like industrial killing was within the Roman Empire. Like they even said, I was just watching a documentary about soldiers, about Roman soldiers, and like, why would you stand in a line with a shield with a sword that long against like Germanic tribes which are almost twice your size running down at you with a hill with a sword as long as probably twice of your arm running at you, but your discipline has trained you to stay like that? And I think that they basically said that they've been like disciplined, and discipline has like been beaten into them. And like I was remember just one of the things that was weird, like, you've got like decimal, you've got decimation.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
They went through that, and I was like, yeah, literally, if there was a mutiny, I think they said it was under Pompey Magnus that there was a mutiny, and basically he said he ordered decimation in a legion, which meant that like 1 in 10, they put their hands into a bag. Whoever picked up like a stone that had something on it, the other people within that group would literally beat them to death. And if they didn't, then another group, the other legions, would then beat them all to death. And you're like, wow. And then you do see that with that army, the special forces that belong to the Emperor.
You
see with the Sardaukar that it's discipline beaten into them.
Yeah.
And like they're an elite unit, but it's like do they really think for themselves?
They're not, because they're not superhumans, unlike, say, the Space Marines in Warhammer 40,000, or like in Marvel with, superheroes. They're just hard mofos, honestly. Really hard. Like, they even hide in their hair, they'll hide like a little bit of chicken wire that they'll just sneak out and wrap around someone's neck and kill them. Like, they're savage. Are there any characters in the Dune movie that stood out to you, Josh?
In the new one?
Yeah.
I thought Leto Atreides was excellent.
Oh yeah, great beard,
really
great beard.
That beard was awesome.
That is
I could grow a beard.
Beard goals. Yeah, you're trying, but not so good.
I'll be queuing up round the corner. I thought they did a really good job with him. Really, really good. Paul, I don't know.
Oh, Timothy Chalamet.
Yeah, I don't know. I think we'll have to see how he sort of grows into the role, and whether it's his sort of vulnerability is a deliberate thing, because obviously he's meant to be young in the book,
like teenager. Yeah.
But I compare him to the Lynch film and the Paul that was in that. I can't remember the name of the actor, and I thought he did a pretty good job. Stilgar, I thought Stilgar was excellent. So
needed to see more of him. He was great.
What's the name of the actor?
Javier Bardem.
I mean, Javier Bardem is just the man, isn't he? Anything he does.
Yeah, like No Country for Old Men.
The villain he played in Bond as well.
Yeah, that was really good. Yeah, that was a very cool, unsettled villain. Yeah.
Anyone else?
I think Jessica is played by Rebecca Ferguson?
Yeah,
I think. Yeah, really good. Like, really well done. Like, cool character. Like, strong character. Like, the way she basically teaches Paul everything, and then when they're like kidnapped by the Harkonnens and about to be chucked off into the desert, like, they deliberately cover her mouth because they know that she can use the voice on them and basically solve the whole situation. Paul, they don't know he's the Kwisatz Haderach, and he can do that because only Bene Gesserit, only female members of the Bene Gesserit can do it. She's like, do it, and then he's kind of a bit weak with it, so he can roughly do it. He gets one guy to go up to her and like lower the mask on her face, and he like snaps out of it. But then because she's now can speak, she like completely controls him and gets him to kill his colleague and stuff. And crazy. I thought she was done really well. Pretty cool. I think the way they showed the Fremen was pretty nice as well. You'll see a lot more in part 2, like about their ways, but the way they preserve water and the still suits as well. And again, this is it. This is why I feel there's a lot of environmental undertones in this, because the way they talk about water and how precious it is in this movie. Like when Stilgar, the leader of the Fremen, comes to meet Duke Leto Atreides and his son, first time he goes and just goes spits on the table in front of him, and like everyone's like, whoa, hey, that's so rude. But that in the Fremen culture, because water is so
precious,
so goddamn valuable, just gobbing in front of someone shows how much they mean to you. And at the end, when Paul kills, I keep forgetting that guy's name, such a minor character, but I can't remember his name. Wade. When he kills him, Paul cries a little bit because
Jamis.
Yeah, Jamis, that's it. Yeah. Oh, I thought he said Janice for a second there. When Paul cries, the Fremen are so impressed by that. So, like, he gives water to the dead. Like, Fremen do not cry unless it's really meaningful, because water is so precious, goddamn precious.
And which again ties into the whole religious thing, because they say, "Oh, he knows our ways,"
Yeah.
So people delude themselves, right?
Yeah,
again, this warning about charismatic leaders. But it'd be interesting when you find out what they do with their dead, the Fremen.
Oh yeah, I can't wait for that. I'll keep that secret for now. Yeah, it's crazy.
But interesting point about the climate change sort of agenda within Dune. Frank Herbert apparently, I think he started off as a journalist before he penned.
Yeah, I think so.
He actually went to a city in America, and I can't remember where it was. I looked it up, and I thought, must remember it for the show. I can't remember what it was. Essentially where the locals were battling sand taking over the town.
Really? Okay. Wow. What were they trying to terraform it? Well, terraforming's not something you can do these days, but or back then even.
No, it was essentially a freak weather situation.
Oh, right, okay.
We just had sand just slowly taking over, and it was destroying everything, crops, houses. So you clearly see that's the one of the,
and like,
one of the
like even to your point, they said that, you know, when they had the whole like prospector situation, like in America with San Francisco, everyone's moving out west, and then you'd also have like these small towns like prop up, especially in like New Mexico, Arizona, and all the states where that you have like a lot of like the desert, like the, what is it called again? The Death's Valley area of the United States.
Oh god, yeah, that's
like,
crazy.
They said like the sand, which is weird, is like people would like leave because of opportunity had gone, and like give it like 50, 60 years, the sand would have like reclaimed everything that town had, and it'll just be piled under all the sand. Yeah,
exactly. It's a similar thing in Dune. I mean, I guess Arrakis has already been taken over by the desert, and it is necessary for the worms for their survival. But I can't remember the character. What was the name? Liet Kynes, the Imperial ecologist you see in the movie.
Change.
I can't remember who plays her in the movie, but she was just a imperial civil servant, an ecologist, a sent to the planet, but she fell in love with it. She fell in love with the Fremen. She consumed a lot of spice, and hence she gets those blue eyes, and they say she's gone native because all the natives of Arrakis, the Fremen especially, have very blue eyes because they have so much spice.
Just quickly, do they ever show like an overdose on spice, or can you not get an overdose?
Yes,
you can, yeah.
Right, so spice is really expensive. Okay, it's not so prohibitively expensive that it's basically just a few people and the Fremen that have blue eyes. Like, so basically, if you're middle class and above, you will have enough spice to extend your life, and it has other medicinal properties as well. Now,
they even have spice coffee.
They put it in their food. They make things out of it. And they constantly talk about this cinnamony aroma wherever you are, if people have had spice. Now, I think it's too expensive for people to overdose. You couldn't afford it, even if you were like massively rich. But what they do have is that they have these other byproducts. So they have something called the water of life, which is when they drown a young worm in water, and it ejects this like bile. And the Bene Gesserit use that to activate their powers, so the ability to look into the past. But it's poison. Like a lot of people die trying to go through with this procedure. So there's a lot that's misunderstood about spice. They don't know everything about it. And again, because, of course, they don't have analytical computers, they've got mentats. There's sometimes a lot of guesswork with stuff, even with their technology. And some of the later books explores, actually, this hatred of technology and computing. Have we created this feudal society because we're now dependent on people again, on charismatic leaders and such. But yeah, so... In answer to your question, not sure.
I think, because Paul because he's the Kwisatz Haderach, you see that in the movie, when they rescue the big mining moving cruiser thing from the desert, the worms are coming. Yeah. They're like, okay, don't worry, we got some things to lift it out, but then they malfunction, and the Duke's like, no, we gotta go down and save them. Paul goes out to help, but because their whole area is laced with spice, he just has visions, and he kind of gets a bit paralyzed. I think it's not that he overdoses, but the strong prescience, they call it, the visions of the future, you can have, especially if you're like the Kwisatz Haderach. Yeah, I guess it's not overdosing, but it's very distracting.
You can overdose. I'll tell you why. Because if you think about Children of Dune with Alia, when they talk about...
she's an abomination.
She's continually because so Alia is Paul's sister, and...
Spoilers.
Yeah, okay, I won't go into too much detail on that.
No, you can if you want.
Essentially, she is special. So they refer to her as abomination because she gets taken over by one of her memories. I won't spoil about who it is that takes over her mind. And that's something that Bene Gesserit have to be careful of, because although they have all these memories, the persona, you can actually communicate with the owner of these memories. So imagine being able to communicate with your grandmother like you were having a normal conversation. It's
probably just, are you saving money?
These personas can take over and you become what the Bene Gesserit refer to as an abomination. That happens to Alia. But I think in her trying to extend her power. She keeps talking about the fact that she can't see anymore. She can't see, that she's losing her abilities, and she keeps taking more and more spice. They do refer to the fact that they're getting worried because she's overdoing it. And I don't really think it's like a hangover. I think it's more
addiction.
You're gonna go nuts and all the rest. So
yeah, could be. Yeah, it's hard to really put a conclusive answer on that. Well, enough about addiction. So, we've talked about the most recent movie. There's also the quite iconic David Lynch 1984 movie. Have you seen that?
No.
I think you can find it. Was on Netflix a little while ago. It might still be on there. That I'm not sure. It's very much a product of its time. It's very space opera of the style of Flash Gordon. And an interesting part, you were talking about the soundtrack for the most recent movie, Hans Zimmer. Toto did the soundtrack for the 1984 movie. And if you don't know Toto, I'll just listen to the song Bless the Rains Down in Africa. That it's a bit, I don't know, I just didn't really work for me for that movie, but it's very 80s. If you like that sort of genre of like rock music playing in the background whilst these people riding sandworms shooting laser pistols, then
kind of like a bit like Mad Max type thing, like when they're playing like the electric guitars and they're riding in the desert type.
What, in the recent one?
No, like the old ones,
yeah. That's pretty
it's
cool.
It's an 80s film. You've got to watch it, and that makes some allowances. But there is some really good stuff there, like the set designs, with the guild ships, the big guild ships, and they've got the Gothic architecture. Don't know who decided to incorporate that in their lore thereafter, but they've got the Gothic architecture and the way they create the navigators and stuff like that. There's some really, really good, interesting stuff there. I find the way that people sort of pan David Lynch for it. I know he took some design choices in terms of so in the David Lynch film, one of the reasons why the Emperor hates the Atreides is because they're creating a weapon using sound. Now, the reason why you might think, okay, great, well, surely they've all got guns, so what's the big deal if he can nag someone to death? So the whole thing in Dune is that people don't have guns. That's all, as you saw, it's melee combat, because people have shields and they have las guns. A las gun meeting a shield creates a nuclear explosion, or a small mini tactical nuclear explosion. So they're banned, right? Or later on they get banned, but they don't use them because you don't want a situation where Sergeant so and so causes the loss of heart in the city. And you can't use nukes. So Morgan mentioned the Landsrat. So the aristocracy, the nobles and aristocracy, all the big houses have got together and banned nukes and said that if anybody uses nukes, we're all going to gang up on you and just wipe you out. Because again, it's not fair, it's not gentlemanly. So they go back to melee because everyone can wear shields, which will stop any fast-moving projectiles. Yes, there's the risk of the las gun, but it's self-defeating in a way. So this whole thing in the Dave Lynch film is that he's now found this new way to create a weapon out of sand that negates shields and doesn't have the dangers of having las guns, and it's not nuclear.
It's throwing sand in someone's face.
And it's, so people were a bit like, oh well, why did he throw that in? He didn't need to. There's plenty of stuff there. I think it's a good, coherent film. I think the core aspects of the book are in there, and of course there's the I think the 3-hour fan Spicer. Is it called?
Oh, is that about the movie that they were going to make for Dune, but it got cancelled?
No, so there's a guy called Spice Diver that created a remix, and I'm just looking at it now. It's 3 hours long, and they put in a whole load of deleted scenes, and they chop and change some of it again to sort of make it more follow the books. It's pretty good, actually, and it really heals some of those rather unnecessary complaining about it. But I think both films are good. I think you will find something you like in the David Lynch film as well, if you enjoyed Dune.
Yeah, I really did. Yes, yeah. And like the thing for me, like when I watch sci-fi or fantasy, it always gets me thinking like what the wider world is like. Does the author actually talk about like what happened with Earth, and is everything like set in one galaxy, or is it potentially that humanity has got to the stage that they can travel from one galaxy to another? And are there like any aliens in it as well? Like, that's another thing. Like,
this is why I need to, because I've read up to the 4th book and there's still no mention of aliens, but I've heard from people.
It depends on your definition of aliens.
Yeah, what happens with that?
Okay, so I, as I said, I've not read the his son's books. Okay, what happens is, so as I said, so his Paul's son, Leto II, the God Emperor, the tyrant, he realizes that humanity is dependent on spice, and spice won't be around forever. And he looks for the golden path, and he realizes the only way to set humanity free is to basically cause something called the scattering, which is where humanity is sent out into the deep space in all directions, away from, they refer to the million worlds, the old empire. And he does that by essentially creating a famine, and they refer to it as the famine times. He creates a famine, restricts people use technology, basically forces all of humanity across a million worlds to basically go back to being like almost like medieval level of technology.
Right, that's crazy.
To stimulate this sudden desire to get away from the tyrant. So when, and during that time, he essentially waits for the Ixians, who are like the technocrats of the Dune world, to create a computer that can map star paths, so you don't need spice anymore. Yeah. Obviously, the guild aren't too happy about that, but you know, these things happen. So he waits for that to appear, and then he realizes now after 3,500 years, he can now sort of hang up his thing and turn into a funny weird. He breaks himself up.
By the way, he's also a half worm, half human hybrid. Did he forget to say that?
I did see like on YouTube, like I was like, what on earth is that?
Yeah, that's so weird.
And this is why Paul bottled it. Remember I said earlier, Paul bottled it because he sees that he has to become
a monster.
He has to become a worm to basically be able to take power and cause the scattering, cause the famine times. And his son, he tries to stop his son from doing it. His son basically says, "You're a coward. It's my turn now. This has to be done. I'm going to make this sacrifice." And his son is constantly going on about, "You may think I'm a tyrant, but you have no idea what I've given up to do." And you do sort of start to appreciate it. So yes, it causes the scattering. Scattering happens, and then you get some aspects coming back that have changed. So the Bene Gesserit go out, but they come back as they suspect as the Honored Maters, which are the big baddies in the in Heretics of Dune and Chapter House Dune. But the suggestion is that they're running from something even worse.
Dear, the aliens.
Well, is it the aliens or is it the survivors of the Butlerian Jihad?
Oh, what's the AI tech, like robots?
I don't know. This is just, I've tried, I've spoiled everything for you guys tonight, so I apologize.
No, because I really do like for me, like spoilers don't matter as much because I just want to know, like, understand how everything fits within the specific world, and that's like really important to me. And
the lore.
And I think like it's to your point, like I don't know what I think. Maybe even Star Wars stole this from Dune as well. That they have like a deep space within Star Wars, and like I was like a real big Star Wars nerd like when I was in my teens, and like I'd read like some of the books about the expanded universe. And they had like something called the Yuzhong Vong that came from outside the actual galaxy that Star Wars is set in. And they basically came into the Star Wars universe. And the reason that they were so special is that they were just like a warlike people who were resistant to the Force. Literally like the Jedi. I think they were the worst genocides in like Star Wars history. Like they killed more than any of the periods of the empires combined. Like that's how much damage they did. And like that's what really got me pissed off for like the new films is like you've got all of this stuff right here.
Oh, don't.
But somehow Palpatine has returned.
I know.
Oh, so awful. God.
You should listen to our Star Wars episode. Like we rage on about that.
And like as you're saying, like bring it to Dune. It's like having that deep space. Like the thing with space is that it's so massive, it's so big that you could have had, for example, a human faction that's broken off when humanity left and decided to expand, hasn't seen anyone for tens of thousands of years. The as you said, space nuns arrive, they see a threat and then chase them back into the rest of the Empire space. And I think that's what I really like about anything like sci-fi in general. Like, you have space as like a huge vacuum to use, and like
it's terrifying in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, and like one of the Star Wars stories I was reading about is that, because they have like, the Old Republic type for Star Wars, that there was these group of red-skinned Sith, so the Sith species, who then went off exploring, and then they then I think went into like a wormhole, and that they didn't realize that 3,500 years had passed. So they were still living, and this was even like in one of the extra books at the end, is that after like episode 7, like they were basically living like the Sith were living 3,500 years ago on this planet, and they didn't know that much time had gone past, and like the galaxy
time dilation and sort of black hole physics,
and like
Interstellar,
and like the fact that Luke Skywalker arrives with his son, who is actually called Ben, which also ticked me off as well with the new Star Wars films. And like they arrive and they see like so many different like Force sensitive Sith who basically just lived on this planet. And like, to your point, there could be something within Dune where there's like a group of people who have split off from the rest of the Empire and has been living their own life, preparing to strike, or preparing to, or may possibly even in fear, and that now they see their opportunity. And like, sorry to bring this like to science, like a scientist is saying like, if we meet aliens for the first time, whoever takes the first shot could save humanity.
Yeah, that's true. They'd probably end up like what happened with the Native Americans.
Yeah. And they were saying like it's basically called a theory within the
Avatar. Yeah,
like you've got two people walking in a thick forest where they can barely see anything. They see each other for the first time, not knowing who each other are. They both have a bow. And the question is, do they then, in this thick forest, kill each other, go back and say there are these people, or try and communicate and build a relationship?
I think the logical thing to do would be go back to your community, impale some people, and then show that outsider what you've done to scare them off. Just like Vlad the Impaler. That's the technique.
And like, I can share the video to this and also share it with the both of you. Is like the fact that they just broke it down and said like, you could literally send, because space is so large, you could send like a missile to attack these people basically where you believe they are. And in that time it's taken the missile to hit them, their technology has advanced, that they have blocked it, and they've sent one back at you, and you just don't know that it's coming. And they said even potentially because of space that they could have fired the first shot, but because their technology was not advanced enough, the people who sent the second shot could have killed them, and then both potentially groups could have killed each other.
That's an interesting theory, actually. I would love to do an episode where we just talk about the cosmos, because I find that fascinating, especially, the light speed and how long it takes to travel. Like the light we're seeing in the sky from stars is possibly millions of years old. Even communicating with another civilization, getting to them, like we could be talking to them from a completely different time period.
Yeah. Do an episode on Interstellar.
Yeah, we could do. I feel like I'm not. I don't have the scientific expertise, but Interstellar supposedly had that all laid out.
2 Joshes.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
2 Maesters over. It's time for the 2 Joshes.
It's the time of the 2 Joshes. All fear.
Yeah, exactly. Well, okay. Do you have any last thoughts about the Dune universe, or the movies, or the books? Anything you want to bring up?
Do you know what? When I was writing my notes for this, thinking back, because it's so vast, it's fantastic. I really do recommend you guys read the first 6 books. If you want to go and read any of his son's stuff at maybe I'm thinking of me, because I have talking to others about it. I think it splits the crowd. They say, look, it's good fan fiction, okay, but it's not frank, and how much you like that anyway. One of the things that I point out, one of the quotes that I enjoy so much, because there's so much philosophy that Frank... one of the criticisms of the Dune books is that there's a lot of yapping and not much happening, and he's terrible when it comes to rising big battles, and he's got some interesting ways of talking about characters being intimate with each other. But one of the quotes that I remember is that he talked, and I'm paraphrasing, he says that, and they're talking about machines and why they hate machines so much. And he said that as society, the more the society uses machines, the more it treats people like machines. And they were talking about the fact of overworking people, dehumanizing, of getting away from this concept that you're actually asking a person to do this whole sort of assembly line, sort of McDonald's. Pardon me, probably not a good idea to mention them in a negative context, but this whole idea of an assembly line repeating the same task. You are essentially a human machine, like the Soviets said during Chernobyl. You are a what do they say? You are human robots or whatever,
to
something along
push
those
out
lines.
the radiation.
That's right. That concept of just basically looking at people of their sort of production value rather than looking at them as creative individuals. I really, really stuck with me, and there's loads of stuff like that in the books.
Yeah, there's a lot of philosophy. I feel like we didn't really touch on that, to be honest, but there is so much, especially in God Emperor of Dune as well, when he talks about being a tyrant, and a lot of Paul's son in it, Leto II, being the God Emperor, he just gives so many insights into humanity and all of its problems, all of its downfalls, all of its like inward contradictions, how we're all doomed to basically to our own devices. That's a good point.
What was interesting about that is everyone says, but you're not a god. You're a big worm thing, and
half worm, half human.
But you're not a god. And he said, well, what is a god? I outlive you. I'm bigger than you. I'm stronger than you. I'm more powerful. I've got this army and all these riches. Am I not your god? And it was like, again, it's that whole thing. Yeah.
And like even like listening,
your high worminess.
even like researching it, someone was like, he does actually talk about in the book series like what is a god, and like if you think, he says that it's like more of, especially like a concept. Like for example, people would like worship Pharaoh as a god, realizing that Pharaoh would live only as long as they would. And I think like, and just a quick fun fact here, I was watching this video, I'm not sure if it's 100% true, that the way that they built the pyramids is that they built it in a more of a diamond shape than for it to be a triangle. And I think one of the things that the Pharaoh did when building a pyramid was put a quartz in the base of the pyramid, so therefore in some of them that light could then moonlight could reflect off the quartz, and therefore would be the first laser.
Oh right.
And that's why he was being, and that's one of the reasons, this could all be wrong, but that's why one of the reasons that they worshipped him, because he could literally turn night into day. And it also kind of sees like
using science that he knew.
And it goes back to what both of you are saying, like if you're so advanced enough, long living enough, or powerful enough, you can then convince people to worship the said person, because they're like, compared to this person, I'm basically nothing.
Science can look like magic to the uneducated.
Yeah. And like, and that's one of the things that you really do see at times with like Marvel, is like they tried to like play off like the science part, especially with Doctor Strange, was like a lot of the stuff was like based on mathematics and geometry. But then like when they bring in, have both of you seen the latest Doctor Strange film?
Oh no, Multiverse of Madness, is that what? Yeah, I have. Yeah.
They basically like forget all of that. It's magic now. It's straight. It's kind of like
okay.
But then to your point, like if you took someone from the Dark Ages, brought them to the future, they would literally say the future's full of magicians.
Yeah, just shine, like turn on the light function on your phone and be like, you are gods. Or they'd call you, or they'd try and burn you at a stake thinking you're like a heretic.
What do you think would be the one piece of technology that's so taken for granted by us, but would be for them honestly like life-changing?
I think it's
go on, you go first.
I think it's based on like the time period. Like for example,
of course.
Because like this is another thing that I'm a big history nerd, is that there's also the stuff like the Bronze Age collapse. So like during a period of time in history where ancient Greece had sent out some colonies, and also you had like groups like the Hittites in ancient Egypt. They were thriving, but then something happened in history which then caused a lot of the major civilizations, like the Hittites were like one of the reigning people within the Middle East, but then all of a sudden they just disappeared.
Aliens, definitely.
And then,
aliens.
like, the Egyptians basically became, after the Bronze Age collapsed, became a second-tier empire. Until that's why they lost to the Babylonians, to the Persians, then to the Hellenic Greeks, and then the Romans because of the Bronze Age collapse. And like they said that Greece had colonies all the way out up until like the bottom of Spain to North Africa, and that the Bronze Age collapse caused them to lose contact. So then you've then also kind of like got something similar with the Dark Ages. And I think for the Dark Ages, I think for them is potentially running water. If you think about it, like water is such pivotal and also really important.
What, like clean water?
Clean running water. Like you did have like aqueducts with the Romans, but then like with the Dark Ages, a lot of people would have to go to a lake or carry buckets
or just drink alcohol instead.
which was cleaner than water because they actually had to boil the water to therefore kill some of the bacteria.
And they weren't necessarily aware
of what bacteria was. So
true.
I think for some people, like during the Dark Ages, like having running water would be such an advance for them.
That's a good point, actually. Yeah,
I wonder whether it's something like like email or a telephone. Because the idea that you can communicate over vast distances. You know, you think the world is so much smaller now because we can you can speak to anyone like that as long as they've got an internet connection or a.
But literally, if their king wanted to send a message to somewhere, they'd literally like get a rider with a very strong horse, and then they'd have special laws that like you'd have to give this rider your horse if he stayed at your inn and his horse died.
Going back to Genghis Khan,
just to send a message.
Was it 24 or 48 hours he could deliver a message from one side of the empire to the other?
And using he was using the Silk Road to basically send messages. So he had like message way stations to basically go up and down from Beijing, China, and also parts of Mongolia, all the way down to, I think, as far as like Baghdad and some almost because you had the Silk Trade Road, which would go from China to the Middle East, and then could go into Europe from then. So then basically he built up that trade route to then send messages back and forth.
That's crazy. 48, that is insane.
One bloke with a message doing it. So you would have a horse. He would absolutely bollock this horse to the next way station where there'd be a fresh horse.
His crotch must be so sore after.
No climbing off the horse and having a quick cup of tea and, use the facilities. Jumped onto the fresh horse, bollocked that one to the next way station. He just did that. That's what this guy did.
And I think the advantage they had was that because they were nomadic people, they were born to ride horses. They'd constantly ride horses throughout their lives. So it wouldn't have been as hurtful for them. But just thinking about it,
his crotch would still be here. So even still, it'd be less sore than it. Bloody hell. I've been reading the Witcher books, and there's actually a scene in the second one about this messenger, and just talks about how the messenger's crotch is just always sore. And like he goes to the pub, has a quick meal, and is like, I really want to stay at the night, but I've got to go. And he like gets up, he's like, oh my god. I think
to your point, like emails, like and it's crazy. And I was just listening to a comedian, and he was like, the fact that some of the people who like created some of the telephone and also the light bulb, a lot of them would take like drugs. So he basically, like for example, some would take cocaine, some would take weed, some would take opium, and he was like, some of them must have had to have been high to then say, I want to talk to anyone at any point, at any place in the world. And like if you think about some of these ideas, you think to yourself like, where did they come from? Like I think even like Isaac Newton might have taken some substances in later life as well.
Apologies to the Newton family. We're not.
We're not casting a lot of famous writers. Frank Herbert, he says as one of his inspirations was his experiences on mescaline and magic mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms.
You think drugs had an influence in Dune?
Exactly. Mind-altering drugs, advancing civilization. I'm not saying that about drugs today, because there is actually a drug called spice in the real world, and it is horrible. Like, you do not want to take that and pretend you're part of the movie.
Is that the artificial cannabis one?
I really don't know much about it. I've just seen it in a lot of like comedies and stuff. And
I think it is horrible stuff. But anyway,
we
digress.
Frank Herbert, Aldous Huxley, writer of Brave New World, The Doors of Perception, talks a lot about mescaline and acid. A lot of these big writers and stuff were inspired by taking psychedelics and stuff. But because we're a kosher show, we're gonna stop talking about that. I think, just quickly, because I think we're running out of time, my invention, I think, that would wow people is just a lighter. Just a clipper lighter that you have in your pocket. Because, I mean, up until, I guess, the Victorian times, people would have to, if you want to light a fire in your house, unless you had like a gas hob maybe from the 1700s, before that, you have to literally get some wood, get some flint, chisel that stuff. It takes a while, and then you've got to make sure you properly feed it. Having just to be able to literally light something on fire with a little piece of plastic and a bit of metal in your pocket, I think it's such a small, insignificant thing to us, but to the cavemen, hell yeah, that would be a great piece of technology. Even in medieval times, you'd be a witch.
You think everything we've achieved in our advanced society...
Careful, you're not covering the mic.
Oh.
No one cares what you've got to say.
Everything we've achieved in our advanced society, one of the fun, apart from freezing water, probably the most fundamental chemical reaction we can do is to heat something up.
Yeah.
Everything comes from that.
The increased brain power came from the fact that we were then able to then
cook food,
add more energy to the food we're eating by cooking it.
Well, even coffee. Some people theorize that a lot of Arabian peoples had a golden age in the early medieval time because they cultivated drinking coffee within society. It allowed them to stay up later, work harder, and also make scientific discoveries and literary discoveries, the alphabet, algebra. A lot of people think it's because they were drinking coffee.
And like even to that point, to earlier discussions, the thing that was really clever was that they were also using the Silk Road as well. So then they would have the insights from China at the time, which was the most powerful country in the world. So they would then get the insights from China, some of the technology that China has, some of the thinking that China has, and also what they've also developed themselves to then be able to advance, for example, advances in medicine, advancing in mathematics as well. And then also to the latter point, what ended the golden age was actually the Mongol invasion.
That's true. We really do need to do a history hit on Two Maesters. We are thinking of pivoting that way. We've got some ideas from people.
All history or just a bit? I mean, it's a 1 hour show.
The entire history of the world in 2 hours. I think we could do that. Right, where do we start? Oh god. That would be quite a challenge. There's actually a book I read called The History of Everything, which is a big book, but it's more of like a Marxist interpretation of history. But someone at least tried to do the entire history of the world.
I think BBC did I remember watching it. BBC did like a 7-part documentary on it, and it was really good because they were saying that one of the inventions that we take for granted is the sewing of clothes.
Right.
And then the fact that if you sew clothes onto a person's body, it then keeps the heat in. And they said that's probably one of the reasons why, the whole other reasons that the Neanderthals didn't survive as long. Because you could think, like, if close actually knitted clothes onto your body, one, it then prevents it from being too heavy, that causing you to be weighed down. Especially if it gets wet, it would weigh you down a lot. And also it would actually keep the heat in as well.
Using less calories.
Yes.
So, more foods go around, you've got more energy, you can achieve more. Okay, it's interesting.
Yeah, I suppose. Well, I know what I'm doing again. I'm going to sew some clothes directly onto my skin. Oh, that would be nasty. We are going to do some body horror stuff on this show. We're going to talk about The Fly, The Thing, maybe even Hellraiser as well. I mean, that's iconic. We want to talk about anything science fiction, fantasy, even horror, iconic stuff, and history, I guess.
Culture
history
series. Ian Bagg's culture series. If you're not thinking about that, you should.
I've got so much homework already.
Really good.
I've got so much homework. I've been watching Picard. I've been reading The Witcher. I can't go into something else as well. But anyway, we've digressed enough. In case you've been watching this episode back to front, we're not doing a talk about philosophy and the greatest inventions. We're talking about Dune. But, you know, Dune is a very philosophical show. So we got onto that eventually. But I'm afraid, folks, that's all we have time for. I've got to say, it's been an absolute rush of a time to have you on, Josh number 2. Unfortunately, you won't be replacing me on this show. I am irreplaceable, just like the God Emperor.
That's why we're starting a new show, the Two Joshes.
Yeah.
Next door.
Fine. I'll find another part then. I'll find someone called Morgan out there to come on my show. The Two Morgans versus the Two Joshes. When David's met Goliaths. So... it's time to go have some spice and have some weird dreams, folks. No, don't do that. Seriously, don't. That's a Dune reference. But I'd highly recommend watching Dune Part 1. Part 2 is coming out later this year, so I'm very hyped for that. I would love to do an episode for that, maybe just after it. Who knows? Any closing remarks from you, Josh, number 2?
Read the books. They are fantastic. I've had a blast reading them. And just to say, gents, thank you very much for having me on the show. I've had a great time.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Anything from you, Josh, number 1?
I would say, remember I mentioned a few weeks ago I had like loads of Amazon credit that I hadn't used before. I hadn't used at all.
Yeah.
Now I know what I'm going to spend those 7 credits on, catching up with Dune. Because
your audibles are actually quite good. I like them.
And like it's been there for like
peasant.
I kept on seeing like Dune every single time. Like, you like sci-fi, listen to Dune. I'm like, I'm not sure. And then it's like every time like I would go onto Audible. These are the likes. Dune book 1, 2, 3, and then I'm like, should I read it?
It's Destiny.
But now it has been Destiny, but now definitely I'll give it, and I'll possibly read it as well, because I think one of the things that I do like is that sometimes I listen to it on Audible and then later on read it as well.
Okay, yeah.
And then I think one of the things that you have with like Audible is that if you listen to an Audible, you then think of the pronunciations of the words based on the person who's narrating it, less than the person you would have actually thought when reading the books.
Yeah, I know, like Dune, for example. I actually need to listen to Frank Herbert say Dune on like something from like the 80s or 70s, because I'm still not sure. Dune.
What's the Benetalax? I don't know if that's right.
Yeah. Oh my god.
I have no idea. I'm too afraid at this point to find out.
With adaptations of Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon, like I was like, oh, so that's how you pronounce it. I was getting it wrong this whole time.
Yeah.
Well, alas, folks, our wonderful audience, I'm sorry for all the spoilers, but quite frankly, we just can't do the show without spoiling things. If you do really, really love our show, then just give us a like. Click the notification symbol so you can find out more. We now are on Spotify and on YouTube, of course. If you really, really, really do love us, then please subscribe to our Patreon. We need all the money we can get so we can spend it on spice. No, just kidding. We spend it on other stuff. But please, we would love it very much. And our work is nothing without you. So have a lovely rest of your week, folks, and stay warm this January. Bye-bye.
See you, folks.
Ciao.